The studio lights burn white, hot, slicing across the panel like judgment. The laughter that filled the air seconds ago curdles into a thick, uneasy quiet. Joy Behar leans forward, eyes sharp, voice trembling between fury and disbelief. Then, maybe you shouldn't be here at all. The slap of her note cards against the glass table snaps through the studio like a gunshot. Tom Cruise doesn't move. His jaw tightens, but his gaze stays calm, too calm. The audience gasps, a ripple of shock spreading through the front row. Whoopi shifts in her chair, half ready to cut to commercial, half terrified to miss what might become television history. The camera zooms in on Joy. Her face flushes crimson. She tries to hold the moral high ground, but something in Cruise's stillness unnerves her. He doesn't blink, doesn't defend. He just watches her, measured, unflinching, like a man who's seen this storm before. The silence grows unbearable. Somewhere, a producer shouts, "Wrap it." But the sound never reaches the stage. The mics are still live. The world is still watching. Cruise finally speaks, voice low, deliberate. "You think this is about me being here?" His words hang in the air like smoke. Maybe it's about why conversations like this never happen unless someone risks being uncomfortable. Joy recoils slightly, caught off guard by the tone, neither hostile nor apologetic, just hauntingly clear. The audience murmurs, unsure whom to root for. A woman in the third row presses her hand to her mouth. Whoopi leans forward, whispering, "Okay, we're going to a break." But no one moves. The cameras stay locked. The viewers at home feel it, the tremor before a cultural earthquake. And then, as the lights shimmer against the polished desk, the narrator's voice cuts through the tension. This wasn't supposed to happen on daytime TV. But what triggered this meltdown wasn't politics. It was something far more personal. Screens across America freeze on Joy's glare, Cruise's calm, and that impossible silence between them. Social media explodes. Clips circulate before the segment even ends. Hashtags ignite, fans divide, headlines race, because everyone saw the confrontation. But no one yet knows the truth behind it, and what Tom Cruise said next would leave even the producers scrambling to stop the show. It began innocently enough, just another glossy Thursday on The View. The audience clapped, the mugs were set, and the host cards gleamed under the lights. Tom Cruise had come to promote a film, another blockbuster stitched with impossible stunts and quiet heroism. But minutes into the interview, something shifted. The conversation turned from cinema to conviction. Cruise spoke not about box office or spectacle, but about discipline, about belief, about how, in his words, Hollywood celebrates rebellion but punishes commitment. His tone wasn't arrogant, just anchored. He spoke of purpose, of pushing limits, of how faith in one's craft can be an act of defiance in an industry built on convenience. The room leaned in. Joy Behar leaned back. Her smile tightened, the kind that hides both skepticism and strategy. She interrupted softly, her words sliding in like a blade disguised as a question. "That's easy to say when you're worth $500 million. Tom, some people can't afford to chase meaning." The audience chuckled uneasily. Cruise didn't. His eyes locked on hers. Not confrontational, but piercing, like he'd heard that line too many times before. He answered evenly, "It's not about money. It's about what you stand for when it costs you comfort." The air thickened. The laughter died. Narration rose over the stillness. What began as a polite exchange quickly turned into a philosophical standoff between conviction and cynicism. Behar pressed on, her voice sharp with practice as authority. She framed his passion as detachment, his ideals as luxury. People can't just live on belief, she quipped. Some of us have bills, not producers. The crowd laughed again, louder this time, forced. Cruz didn't flinch. And that's exactly the trap, he said quietly. We stop believing because we think struggle cancels purpose. But maybe struggle proves it. Neither smiled, neither blinked. The cameras caught it, the flicker of disbelief, the electric pause between two worlds colliding. Neither knew that in this moment, before the explosion, they were crafting the clip that would define them both in a single afternoon. And yet, as tense as it already was, the real spark hadn't even been lit yet. Joy Behar had built her career on the strength of her voice, a voice that could turn sharp observation into punchline, skepticism into applause. She came up in smoky clubs, wielding humor like armor in a world that rarely handed women a microphone, much less the last word. Comedy taught her survival, television gave her power, and in daytime talk, she became what every producer craved and every guest feared, a presence that filled silence before anyone else could. But years at the head of The View transformed that armor into institution. Joy wasn't just the funny one anymore. She was the guard at the gate, the keeper of tone, the one who made sure every conversation stayed within the familiar boundaries of what was acceptable, marketable, safe. When she laughed, America laughed with her. When she frowned, viewers felt they had permission to do the same. Over time, her humor became more than entertainment. It became authority. That authority, though, carried blind spots. She believed she was speaking truth to power, but she'd become a kind of power herself, a queen of daytime discourse, confident that every topic could be reduced to common sense and quick wit. She wasn't cruel, she was certain. Her laughter could disarm, but lately it had started to defend, shielding her from ideas that pressed too close. In the moments before Tom Cruise arrived, Joy told herself this would be routine. Promote the film, tease the star, keep it light. But when he began to talk about belief and conviction, she felt that old flicker of resistance, the one that whispers, "Don't lose control of your own stage." She smiled wider, leaned in closer. "You can't let him hijack your show," she thought. That thought wasn't vanity. It was instinct. Joy had seen what happens when guests derail the rhythm, when seriousness replaces sparkle, when sincerity stretches past the commercial break. Audiences get restless. Producers panic. And yet, as she watched Cruise speak with unflinching calm, she sensed something rare. He wasn't playing the game. For a woman who'd mastered control, that was the real provocation. She tried to keep the tone playful, but her jokes landed heavier than she intended. Each laugh came quicker, a little sharper, as if to remind everyone, including herself, that she was still the center of gravity. But with every calm word from Cruise, that gravity began to weaken. The cameras caught everything: the tightening jaw, the slight glance toward Whoopi, the way her laughter hung a beat too long. Power, she realized, feels different when it's questioned by conviction instead of chaos. For most guests, the pressure of that table made them fold. But Tom Cruise didn't fold. He didn't yield to timing, tone, or television etiquette. And in that defiance, something in Joy Behan's kingdom began to tremble. And Tom Cruise. He was about to flip the table entirely. Tom Cruise built his legend the hard way, not through scandal or shortcuts, but through the kind of relentless discipline that made even his critics grudgingly respect him. He wasn't born into Hollywood privilege. He clawed his way into it, one audition, one rejection, one bruised rib at a time. The man who does his own stunts never fakes his beliefs. He learned early that if you want to stay standing in an industry built on illusion, you'd better anchor yourself to something real. Behind the megawatt smile was a boy who moved from town to town, trying to outpace instability. Acting wasn't his first dream. It was his escape hatch. But once he found the camera, he treated it like a contract with destiny. Every role became a test of endurance. Fly the jet, climb the tower, hang from the plane. If he couldn't do it for real, he didn't want to do it at all. It wasn't ego, it was faith and authenticity. That faith, though, came at a price. Hollywood loves charisma, not conviction. It rewards charm over certainty, ease over effort. And Tom Cruise never learned how to be casual about anything. In a culture that mocks seriousness, he insists on meaning. He believes work is worship, that purpose gives pain a reason, and that discipline, more than talent, is what separates icons from statistics. He doesn't hide behind PR scripts. He builds his own narrative in sweat and bruises. When he talks about belief, he doesn't mean slogans or sermons. He means showing up every day, no excuses. And that's why his interviews often spiral beyond the safe territory of movie promotion. Because to him, and pretending that art and life are separate is the ultimate lie. So when he sat at the View's table that morning, surrounded by bright lights and brighter opinions, he wasn't trying to stir controversy. He was trying to speak plainly in a place that rewards noise. He talked about hypocrisy in Hollywood, about how authenticity has become the new rebellion, about the courage it takes to mean what you say when everyone else is performing. Joy Behan heard it as arrogance. The audience heard it as tension. But for Cruise, it was just honesty, unfiltered, unperformed, maybe even naive in its purity. To him, truth isn't polite. It's earned. And that's what made that segment so combustible. He didn't raise his voice or shift in his seat. He didn't hide behind charm. He just looked across the table with the calm of a man who's done the hard work of believing in something, even when belief costs you comfort, friends, or reputation. In that calm, Joy felt the tremor of something unfamiliar. A man who didn't need approval to feel whole. He'd spent decades perfecting every frame, every movement, every moment on screen. But this live exchange wasn't about precision. It was about presence, about whether conviction could survive in a space designed for applause. And when the laughter faltered, when the host's smile thinned, and when the studio air grew tight with discomfort, Cruise didn't back down. He didn't look away. Because when authenticity walks into a studio built on applause, silence becomes dangerous. The moment the conversation turned serious, the rhythm of the View began to fracture. Joy Behan shifted in her chair, eyes flicking toward the producers off camera. Tom Cruise leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, not combative, just grounded. He spoke slowly, each word deliberate, each pause heavy enough to make the laughter stop before it started. I think, he said, the media has forgotten what honesty sounds like. We've traded truth for trend. Joy's eyebrows arched. Oh, come on, Tom. She cut in, voice bright but sharp. You're talking to people who do this every day. We ask questions. We show both sides. That's what media is supposed to do. Cruz nodded, almost respectfully. But whose truth are you showing? The audience murmured, caught between admiration and unease. Behan's smile froze into something thinner. Whose truth? You make movies for a living, sweetheart. Don't talk to me about truth. You sell fantasy better than anyone. Cruz didn't flinch. Fantasy can tell truth, he replied. But pretending cynicism is wisdom. That's the real illusion. The crowd oohed softly, that nervous sound that lives between shock and applause. Behan laughed louder than before, trying to reclaim control. Oh, please, you sound like a motivational poster. People don't live on conviction. They live on paychecks. He smiled faintly, and maybe that's why so many feel empty, even when they have won. Her laughter caught, just for a second. Whoop's eyes darted between them, searching for an opening to cut in. But the energy at the table had already changed. Cruz's voice stayed low, steady. You think conviction is luxury, Joy, but it's the only thing that keeps people from giving up. When you mock it, you tell everyone watching that faith, whatever form it takes, is foolish. Behan's tone hardened. No one's mocking faith. I'm mocking the idea that one man, sitting in a mansion, gets to lecture people about struggle. Cruz leaned back slightly, gaze unbroken. You think comfort cancels compassion? He asked. You think someone's bank account disqualifies them from caring? The studio went quiet. The applause sign stayed dark. Behan looked to the audience, trying to summon the usual rhythm, the familiar laughter that buffered her toughest lines. But it didn't come. Her authority, usually buoyed by crowd energy, was hanging by a thread of noise that refused to return. He pressed on, voice softer now. You talk about real struggles, and you're right. They matter. But every person who ever changed something started by believing something unpopular. And I wonder if, maybe, we've forgotten how to listen when belief sounds different. There was no hostility in his tone, only weight. The kind that lands and stays. Joy crossed her arms. So now I'm the villain for asking questions. Cruz shook his head. No. And you're the example of how hard it is to have a real conversation on television. It hit like a quiet punch. The audience didn't gasp this time, they just watched. Narration slipped in, the voice low, cinematic. What once felt like television now felt like a trial, and millions would soon take sides. Behan's laugh returned, brittle, mechanical. Well, this is daytime TV. Tom, we're not here to start revolutions. He leaned in, eyes locked. Maybe that's the problem. The line hung in the air like a final verdict. Even Whoopi, the veteran moderator, didn't know where to go next. She opened her mouth to pivot. Let's take a quick break. But no one heard her over the silence. Every heartbeat in the studio felt amplified, each second stretching wider. The cameras panned across faces. Shock. Admiration. Behan exhaled a long, audible breath. Okay. She muttered, I think we need to. Cruz didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. His stillness said everything. And the narrator whispered, but Cruz wasn't finished. What came next silenced the panel. The tension hung so thick it felt like smoke. The camera caught every flicker of light bouncing off Tom Cruise's face, the perfect storm of poise and pressure. His voice didn't rise, it sank, cutting through the hum of studio air like a scalpel. "You mock conviction," he said slowly, eyes locked on Joy Behar, "because you've forgotten what it costs." A stillness fell over the table. Even the ever-humming stage lights seemed to pause. Behar blinked. Once, twice, searching for the rhythm that had carried her through 1,000 debates. It didn't come. Cruise leaned back slightly. "You think conviction is arrogance, but conviction is paid for in scars, in losses, in the nights you ask yourself if what you believe is even worth the fight." The camera zoomed in on Behar's face. The smirk gone, replaced by something unreadable. He continued, voice quieter now, steadier, as if confiding in the room rather than confronting it. "You've spent decades sitting at this table, asking people what they stand for. But the moment someone answers with something you don't like, you call it privilege." A murmur rippled through the audience, soft, hesitant. Not applause yet, just movement. Cruise's gaze didn't waver. "I've seen privilege. I've lived comfort. And I've also seen what happens when people lose everything. You talk about the real world. I've walked through refugee camps. I've met kids who dream of doing something great, not because it's glamorous, but because it's all they have left. Don't tell me belief is detached from struggle." Behind him, the monitors flashed old clips. The mission, impossible stunts, the quiet moments on red carpets, but also those rare humanitarian scenes. Crews shaking hands in earthquake zones, speaking to displaced families, standing behind the camera when no one else was watching. The montage wasn't part of the show. It was a memory, an emotional undercurrent that lived inside his words. Behar swallowed hard. "So you're saying, what? That we're all hypocrites for asking questions?" Cruise shook his head, his expression almost tender. "I'm saying questions are only honest if you're willing to hear the answers." The audience inhaled as one. A man in the front row nodded slowly, as though he'd been waiting years for someone on television to say it that plainly. "If you can't stand passion," Cruise said, voice tightening just slightly, "maybe it's not passion that's the problem. Maybe it's comfort." The line landed like a thunderclap. The crowd didn't cheer right away. They just sat stunned. Narration drifted in. The applause wasn't loud. It was stunned, an echo of a moment when entertainment stopped and something human took its place. The director's voice crackled in Joy's earpiece. "Go to break. Go to break!" But her hand hovered in the air, caught between pride and disbelief. She forced a laugh brittle, like glass about to crack. "Well, Tom, maybe you should have your own show if you want sermons at 11 a.m. Cruise didn't flinch. "I don't want a show," he said softly. "I just don't want to pretend." That was it. That was the moment the oxygen left the room. Whoopi tried to step in, voice calm but trembling. All right, let's take a breath. We'll be right back." But the director's signal was too late. Cameras kept rolling as the chaos behind the scenes began, producers waving, stagehands whispering, cue cards flying. The studio floor hummed with confusion. Audience members glanced at each other, uncertain whether they were witnessing an argument, a revelation, or the end of something bigger. Cruise remained still, hands folded in front of him. He wasn't gloating, wasn't smirking, just resolute. The narrator's tone deepened. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need the applause. He owned the silence. Then, finally, the red light above camera one flickered off. Commercial. The crowd exhaled, whispers breaking the vacuum. Joy turned away and muttering something to a producer. Voice clipped and low. Her earpiece came out. Her notes hit the table. Her chair scraped back. Tom stayed seated, eyes fixed on the desk, unloving. Narration resumed. They say television is built on illusion, on keeping the moment alive, even when it dies. But that day, illusion broke. As the feed cut to a commercial for dish soap and laughter-filled jingles, the audience didn't move. People stared at the stage as though waiting for someone to tell them what they'd just witnessed. And when the lights dimmed and the music swelled for the return, Joy Behan's chair was empty. Her mug, half drained, still sat in front of her placard. The camera panned awkwardly, landing on Whoop's uneasy smile. Narration whispered the final beat. But when they came back from break, Joy Behan was gone. The clip went live before the credits even finished rolling. A shaky phone video of the exchange, Joy Behan's disbelief, Tom Cruise's calm. The deafening pause hit Twitter like a meteor. Within an hour, the View meltdown of the year was trending worldwide. Prev joystick pay conviction clash, pet explosiveness. Each hashtag turned the talk show into a battlefield. Edits flooded TikTok. Cruise's words slowed down to cinematic reverb. Reaction emojis layered over audience gasps. Captions like, "This is what truth sounds like." Some fans spliced in scenes from Mission Impossible. Timing the moment Cruise said, "I just don't want to pretend," with a musical crescendo. On one side of the internet, Behan's defenders rallied. They called her brave for holding her ground. A woman outnumbered by the cult of celebrity masculinity. She's been grilling politicians for decades. One tweet read, "She doesn't owe him reverence." But others saw something deeper, a crack in the mainstream facade. Tom Cruise didn't argue, one viral post said. He exposed what happens when authenticity collides with performance. Another added, he didn't go on The View, he broke the view. Late night hosts joined the frenzy. Some mocked the tension with punchlines about Scientology versus sarcasm. Others, more cautious, admitted the moment felt different. One commentator on CNN described it as a cultural pressure valve bursting on live television. Clips from Behan's earlier career resurfaced. Her stand-up monologues about truth and hypocrisy, her barbed one-liners about power and fame. Commenters began splicing those jokes beside her heated exchange with Cruise. "Full circle," someone wrote. The jester became the gatekeeper. Meanwhile, Cruise's PR team said nothing. No press release, no spin, no apology. Just silence. That silence spoke louder than any statement could. Narration crept in, reflective and cinematic. It wasn't about who won. It was about who dared. For some, Cruise became a symbol of unfiltered authenticity. A man who, for better or worse, refused to shrink his convictions to fit the couch. For others, he was an uninvited sermon in a space built for sound bites. But either way, the world couldn't stop watching. By morning, analysis videos filled YouTube. Body language experts broke down every blink and hand movement. Notice how Cruise stays centered. One explained, while Behan leans forward, asserting control. Another claimed, You can see the instant she realizes she's lost the crowd. Politicians even chimed in, some using the moment to talk about free speech, others mocking the country's obsession with celebrity discourse. The line between news and entertainment blurred further until it felt like there was no line left at all. In think pieces and podcasts, the moment became mythic, a parable of modern media. One columnist wrote, Behar represented the comfort of consensus. Cruz represented the danger of meaning. Another said, it wasn't a fight, it was a mirror for fans. It wasn't just entertainment, it was permission. And the permission to speak with conviction, to resist conformity, to believe that maybe passion didn't need to be polite. Memes flourished. Cruz photoshopped with angel wings. Behar wielding cue cards like a shield. Choose your fighter, one post joked. But beneath the humor, something real simmered. Exhaustion with the endless civility that suffocated authenticity. The laughter faded. The narration echoed. What remained was something raw, uncomfortable, unedited, and real. By the end of the week, The View's YouTube channel had gained 2 million new subscribers. The clip surpassed every political confrontation the show had ever aired. For networks, it was a reminder of television's old magic, its power to ignite, to divide, to make people feel alive again. Even in outrage, still questions hung heavy. Why did this moment matter so much? Why this debate on this day between these two people? Because it wasn't just about Tom Cruise or Joy Behar. It was about a generational fracture. The divide between those who curate truth and those who crave it. Between speech controlled for comfort and speech that risks chaos for meaning. Cruz had walked out of the studio unchanged. Behar had walked out unseen. But behind the curtain, producers whispered about the fallout. Contracts, sponsors, segments pulled from rotation. The network braced for impact, unsure whether they just aired a PR disaster or the most important television moment of the decade. Narration deepened. Reverent, it wasn't about power. It was about permission. The permission to believe again, even when belief costs everything. And just as the frenzy began to fade, a new headline broke across the feeds. Joy Behar contacts The View producers with a stunning demand. The story wasn't done. The next morning, the shock wave was about to hit again, this time from behind the desk. The next morning, The View opened without fanfare. The camera swept across the familiar faces, the mugs, the papers, everything in place, but the air different. Joy Behar sat in her usual seat, posture straight, tone even, no mention of Tom Cruise. No reference to the viral storm tearing through the internet. She smiled faintly, that practices blend of humor and composure, and said, you know, we all have our truths. Sometimes they collide. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. The audience clapped gently, uncertain if they were applauding reconciliation or deflection. Whoopi nodded beside her, sensing the delicate balance. Television's quiet attempt to turn chaos into control. But the narration cut in, steady and reflective. In an age obsessed with being right, a clash like this felt strangely cleansing. It reminded people that conviction, real conviction, can't be manufactured or moderated. Clips from the confrontation still looped across every platform, dissected and re-uploaded, but something had shifted in tone. It was no longer just outrage, it was reflection. People began quoting Cruz's words, not as celebrity sound bites, but as questions for themselves. Whose truth are you showing? Became a slogan, a challenge, a mirror. And yet, Cruz said nothing. No interviews, no clarifications, no PR pivots. His silence became a kind of punctuation mark, the full stop on a sentence he'd already finished speaking. That restraint, in a culture addicted to noise, felt like defiance. Narration deepened, cinematic and calms. Sometimes the loudest message isn't the one spoken. It's the one that lingers when everything else stops. Behar, for her part, didn't retreat. The next few episodes showed her sharper, but also more careful. There was a flicker behind the jokes now, an awareness of what happens when conviction collides with control. She had faced someone who didn't play the media game and lost, not in argument, but in authenticity. Still, she showed up. That was her quiet redemption. The moment had grown beyond them both. Commentators began writing essays titled "The Day Television Blinked," and "Authenticity, This Authority." The clash that defined 2025. What began as entertainment now lived as metaphor. The world doesn't need perfect hosts, the narration said. It needs honest ones. The moral was simple. But it landed with weight. When you speak from belief instead of comfort, you risk misunderstanding, but that risk is proof you're alive. For viewers, the debate had become more than spectacle. It was a reflection of their own tension, the pull between fitting in and standing firm, between keeping peace and keeping truth. And somewhere, under the hum of the cameras, that tension felt sacred. Because authenticity, by its nature, provokes resistance. It threatens what's shallow, exposes what's rehearsed. That's why it feels dangerous, and that's why it matters. The narration softened, the pace slowing to a heartbeat rhythms. Maybe that's the real lesson, that conviction, not comfort, keeps conversation alive. The screens dimmed, the chatter faded, but the question remained, echoing quietly in living rooms across the country. What do you believe in enough to stand for, even when it costs you applause? The story might have started with a clash on daytime television, but it ended as something larger, a reminder that truth isn't polite and passion isn't always pretty. Yet without them, nothing ever changes. The scene closed on the image of Behar sipping from her mug, half smiling into the camera as the credits roll. No fireworks, just a woman and a table holding the silence like a truce. And the narration whispered, fading to black. That's why this moment won't fade anytime soon. Joy Behar stopped the view, but Tom Cruise stopped the noise. The final narration rose like an echo, calm yet thunderous in meaning. What began as a daytime debate had turned into a mirror. One reflecting not just two clashing personalities, but a society wrestling with its own voice. In a world where every headline screams for attention, the narrator continued. Sometimes it takes a moment of stillness to remind us what truth actually sounds like. Clips flashed across the screen. The frozen stare, the trembling silence, the moment when entertainment turned into reckoning. No music swelled, just the hum of truth settling into place. Cruz's quiet defiance lingered like a challenge. What if conviction mattered more than applause? What if we stopped laughing long enough to listen? Because maybe, the narrator said, conversation isn't meant to make us comfortable. Maybe it's meant to make us conscious. The screen darkened, a single spotlight illuminating the empty view table. The mug sat untouched, the chairs perfectly aligned. like a stage waiting for the next story. The next voice brave enough to disrupt the script. If you believe conversation should challenge comfort, the narrator urged, share this story, let it travel. Let it remind people that disagreement isn't division, it's proof we're still listening. The music built softly, a cinematic pulse that carried both tension and hope. Because sometimes the loudest silence changes everything. The logo appeared, elegant and bold, as the narrator's final words landed with conviction. Subscribe for more stories where truth collides with power, where every clash reveals who we really are. The screen faded to black. The silence stayed.